Realization of Oneness, Joel S. Goldsmith, Chapter 9, The Revelation of Spiritual Identity. The only reason the subject of spiritual healing is emphasized in our work is that the practice of this kind of healing deepens and enriches consciousness. And through this practice, the everyday problems of life touch us in a decidedly minor degree. But healing work is not the end or the object of our being on the spiritual path. Rather is it incidental to the major goal of attaining God realization. Anyone who has had any experience in metaphysics must have observed that the life ambition of far too many students is to become either healthy or prosperous. But, at some time or other, these students must learn that lack is not as great a problem as it has been painted, nor is illness. In fact, both disease and lack may serve as incentives to drive us out of the physical and mental limitations with which we have bound ourselves. These limitations are brought about not because the mind and the body are evil or sick, but only because both mind and body have been conditioned by the belief in two powers. A mistake often made by students in their practice of spiritual healing, and one which has been pointed out in previous chapters, is to treat effects, headaches, storms, cancers, polio, denying them or in some way trying to handle them. Never make that mistake. Never under any circumstance treat heart disease, tuberculosis, or any disease of which you have ever heard, or any accident. These are only effects. If you could remove every one of them, the cause would still be there, and the cause is a belief in two powers, a belief in the carnal mind. If, at this moment, you could be made whole, nothing would stop you from becoming sick or poor again tomorrow, unless you yourself had come to the realization that the healing that had taken place was not one of lack or limitation, of fear, of sin or false appetites, of polio, cancer, blindness, or deafness. The healing was in being freed from the belief in two powers, good and evil. Once you begin to heal on this basis, you will find that those who come to you for help are given years and years of freedom from the everyday discords and inharmonies of life. You have set them free, not from their ills but from the cause of their ills, the universal belief in good powers and bad powers. If you are dealing with a cold or the flu, be willing quietly to ponder, reflect, meditate, and cogitate on this truth. God, infinite being, besides which there is no other. God, omnipotence. There is no other power. Nothing can be empowered to do evil. How could it be if God is infinite, if God in infinite good and infinite omnipotence? God constitutes all being. What I am faced with is not evil. It is not a destructive germ. I am faced with a belief in two powers, and I do not accept it. There cannot be God and any other power. There cannot even be a power for good anywhere. There can be only God itself maintaining and sustaining the integrity of its own being. After you have watched the cold or the flu dissolve a few times, you begin to have less faith in the power of evil and much more confidence in the principle of oneness and assurance that this is the great principle of life. All evil, a universal malpractice, the idea of power always suggests one power doing something to another power, and that is why we have to be thoroughly saturated with the principle of non-power. Then, we do not even want a God power to do something for us. We are satisfied that God in its infinite power and wisdom is already doing all that God is supposed to do. Therefore, we need never call upon God or God's power to do anything. So we get used to the idea of not turning to a God power, or the power of truth over error, or good over evil, or God over devil. Our whole consciousness is built on the realization of God constituting all being, and therefore there is neither good nor evil. There is only God. If you can accept God as the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of life, if you can accept the fact that this is a God-created universe and not an accidental one, then you must be able to accept the fact that negative or evil power cannot have any existence outside the mind that believes in it. But because the mind that believes in evil power is the universal mind, every human being to some extent accepts negative or evil powers. Therefore, begin individually to live and move and have your being in the realization of God, and then realize that all else is nothing but mental malpractice, a belief in two powers. Instead of treating disease as disease, sin as sin, or lack as lack, treat it as malpractice, a belief in two powers, and instead of fearing it as malpractice and saying, "Oh, but I must protect myself from malpractice," realize the nature of malpractice as the activity of the human mind, and therefore a nothingness. All evil, whether it appears as lack or limitation, as destructive whether, as infection or contagion, or even epidemics, is malpractice. But it is not the directed thought of an individual. It is the universal malpractice which arises out of the belief in two powers. Your protection is to live in one power, being convinced that anything other than the presence of God is not power. That is your protection, and then none of the evils of the world can enter to defile or make a lie within you. Basic to effective healing must be the realization that you are not dealing with disease or sin. You are not dealing with floods, tidal waves, or typhoons. You are dealing with a universal malpractice made up of the belief in two powers. The water that you see as a mirage on the desert is not water. It is malpractice, and that malpractice is making you see something. That does not exist. It is throwing a picture at you and making you see it erroneously. With that realization, watch how quickly the error begins to subside and then finally dissolve. If you have been a student of some metaphysical teachings, you may have been made to fear people and their malpractice, but now release yourself from that nonsense. It makes no difference if there are persons so misguided as to attempt to malpractice. They are not malpractitioners, and you need fear nothing from them. They are themselves victims of malpractice, of this universal belief in two powers. You can quickly deprive them of that power just as you can deprive a hypnotist of his power. A hypnotist, trying to hypnotize some person or even a whole group of persons, cannot succeed if there is one individual who knows the one power. The minute someone knows that the human mind, that is, the belief in two powers, is not power, and that this belief that mind is power is just the arm of flesh, or nothingness, the hypnotist is ineffective. Recognize any problem as antichrist. There is another term, which is equally effective in healing work, and that is antichrist. When faced with any problem, recognize it as antichrist. In other words, this evil is not aimed at you. It is aimed at the Christ of you. Nobody dislikes or hates you enough to want to make you sick or cause you to die, but this universal malpractice would, if it had intelligence enough, try to wipe out your Christhood. The Master exemplified the truth revealed throughout all time that wherever the Christ appears, it is crucified. The Christ has always been crucified, and the Christ will always be crucified, but it is not a nation or a race that will crucify it. It is the universal belief in two powers that is the Antichrist to you and to me. Therefore, when something like a calendar on the wall says, "You are past 80 years and 10," just look at it and say, Antichrist. You hanging up there on that wall, you do not have any power over me. Imagine giving power to a calendar on a wall, and yet does it not frighten every one of us because of what we have accepted as the belief about the calendar? It makes no difference whether it is a simple cold, an epidemic of polio, or a cancer. Please try to remember this. You are not dealing with names. You are not dealing with effects. You are dealing with the only cause of discord that has ever existed in the world, and that is the hypnotism that comes out of the belief in two powers. Whether you call it hypnotism, antichrist, or malpractice, as long as you impersonalize it and recognize that, because of the nature of God, it must be impotent, you are free, or at least you are on your way to freedom. You will attain your complete freedom in proportion to your ability to impersonalize every phase of error, and then negate it by resting in the Word, by nothingizing it. Do not go out to battle an enemy that is stronger than you are, because you will be overcome by your belief that it is power, and every attempt you make to fight it makes it more powerful. That is why it is not always wise for practitioners to make personal calls on patients. Very, very seldom do I do that, so seldom that I cannot even remember the last time. Why should I? To get the water off the road. It was not there to begin with, so why should I go there to try to remove it from the road? Is there a power to be fought? No, there was no power to begin with, and my running around would merely represent my own degree of fear. Therefore, the wisest course for me to pursue is to stay right at home and realize its nothingness. Evil is not evil. It is Antichrist, and Antichrist is not power. Antichrist must be recognized as a nothingness that would, if it could, destroy spiritual existence. But can immortality be destroyed? Can eternality be destroyed? Can omnipotence have an opponent? When you translate sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation into such words as, "Oh, this is malpractice, a belief in two powers," or "This is Antichrist, a belief in two powers," Or this is a universal hypnotism, a belief in two powers. You have every right to drop it, turn right over and go to sleep, instead of sitting up, fearing it, fighting it, and protecting yourself from it, when in reality there is no it. There is no difference between one disease and another. There is no difference between one sin and another. It is only a matter of realizing that the water on the desert is not water, but a mirage, that disease is not disease, lack is not lack, limitation is not limitation, hate is not hate, hypnotism is not hypnotism. All this is mirage. Rest in the word and do not go out to fight the enemy. Good is omnipresent for more years than I care to tell you about. The thought plagued me. How can I love God? I didn't have a trace of feeling in my soul, my mind, or my heart for God, and I did not know how to love God. I could love God only when I realized that God is not responsible in any way, shape, or manner for the evils of the world, nor is there anything God can do about our false beliefs. I could love God then because I saw the impotence of so-called evil powers. Now I can love God with all my heart and with all my soul, for I know God is maintaining and sustaining his universe. Once it is recognized that the so-called powers of this world are not powers, it will not be long before heaven is established on earth. There is only one power. The belief in two powers which constitutes the carnal mind is temporal power, and it operates as mental and physical power only as long as the belief exists. Once you come, even in a measure, to the realization of God, no good powers, no bad powers, only God and only God power, and to the realization that this belief of two powers operates as a universal malpractice, an antichrist, a nothingness, then gradually do you become free. There are no material or mental powers that can operate in the consciousness of an individual who lives in the realization that God's grace is his sufficiency. When you become free, you may well ask yourself, did God do something for me today that God was not doing before? No, God was doing it all the time, only now you have removed the barrier from yourself. If there are clouds hiding the sun from you, in proportion as those clouds are dissolved, the sun will reveal itself as having been there all the time. Remember that there is no such thing as time, just as there are no degrees of evil. Then you will find that the good which comes into your experience today was there all the time, merely awaiting the removal of the barrier, and the barrier is the universal belief in a power of good and a power of evil which you have accepted. Certainly, through the acceptance of two powers, mental and material laws do operate, and these laws are both good and evil. It is only when we no longer have powers of any kind that we no longer have good mental or material power and bad mental or material power. Revealing the spiritual nature of our being, we do not want to make the mistake of denying matter or mind. But let us understand that there is no good matter or bad matter, and there is no good mind or bad mind. There is only unconditioned mind without qualities of good or evil, because God is unconditioned being. There cannot be a good God or an evil God, and therefore there cannot be good or evil in manifestation. So it is with spirit. Spirit is infinite and omnipresent, not good and not bad. Mind is not good or bad, it is just mind unconditioned. When that truth becomes an integral part of our consciousness, we can look at this world and instead of seeing a conditioned universe, we will begin to perceive it as it really is. When we can look at this universe without judgment as to what or who is good or evil, it will express back to us that which it is. That is why, when we are with anyone who is ill, we close our eyes to the appearance and do not acknowledge him to be sick or well. Furthermore, he is not going to be any more spiritual when he is well than when he is sick. So changing him from being sick into being well is not spiritualizing him, nor is it beholding him as the Christ. We are not interested in health as such. We are interested in the Christ of individual being, the spiritual nature of being, and that means beholding a person as neither good nor evil, but as spiritual, as the child of God. That means working with the sick, but not caring momentarily whether they are sick or well because we are busy bearing witness to the Christ of their being, that which knows neither good nor evil, that which is neither sick nor well, that which is neither young nor old. Healing work is only incidental to revealing the spiritual nature of our being, which has in it qualities of neither good nor evil, qualities of neither youth nor age, qualities of neither life nor death. Each one of us, as a spiritual being, is a manifestation of God, an actual expression of God being. We have been given the full dominion of God, which we show forth in various ways by means of various talents or abilities. Each of these is a facet of God, and we can be full and complete, showing forth whatever our particular gift may be. As human beings, we are not showing forth that fulfillment because we are limited by this same old belief of good and evil, youth and age, hereditary law and environment, all the limitations that have been placed upon us. But in the first realization that we have of the true nature of being, unconditioned and unfettered by beliefs of good and evil, we also find that we have become a more complete expression of God, a fuller expression of intelligence, love, joy, talent, ability, and capacity, and these grow as our own freedom increases. Transition as UNFOLDING consciousness. When we are on the spiritual path, we are laying up spiritual consciousness, and as we leave this plane, which eventually we do, not by death, but by transition, we find ourselves on an ascending scale, always going up, further into the light, further into freedom. There is really only one freedom in all this world, the freedom from the belief in good and evil. When we are free of that, we are truly free of physical, mental, moral, and financial limitations. Fear comes in when we believe that some condition is going to lead to death. Nobody really fears pain of itself. It is only that pain may lead to death. That is what is feared. We may dislike pain, but we do not fear it, not until the thought of death accompanies it. But the thought of death could not frighten anyone who had ever experienced God, for he would know beyond all doubt that there is no power in death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for there are no powers, no destructive powers, no negative powers, no limiting powers. To pass on, to die, to leave this world, however you want to express it, in a sense of freedom means to emerge into freedom with even less bondage to the belief in two powers, and then to live in greater freedom in the transitional stage in which we find ourselves. Always remember the basic premise. God is eternal and immortal, and that means that you and I are eternal and immortal because there is no life but the life of God. That is why you will learn that there is no such thing as young life or old life. There is only life, and it is an immortal and eternal life from which we cannot escape by dying. If you die while still in material sense, you can awaken only in that same material sense, a materiality which may be greatly intensified. The belief in limitation with which you leave this plane becomes greater limitation, but the degree of freedom with which you leave here becomes a greater freedom. The person who goes on from here in material sense, fearing and hating the experience and squeezing himself into it, finds himself more tightly bound than before the transition, whereas the person leaving this plane in spiritual light is wide open for the experience, open to receive more light, more light, more light, and thereby finds himself less fettered on emerging from this plane into his new experience. Consciousness is always embodied. Many persons are puzzled about whether or not we take the body with us when we pass on. It must be understood first of all that consciousness always has form. Consciousness has to be embodied, and therefore we are never separated from body, from the form our consciousness assumes. It is true that our physical body is left for burial or cremation, but actually it is not our body that is left. It is our concept of what body is. We will never be without a body. Even if a person should rise so high as to learn how to travel through the air without an airplane, he would find that he is still embodied. But actually, we are not now in a body. If a surgeon could examine us from the topmost hair of our heads to our toenails, he would never find us. Because we are not in the body. We are not in the body at all. We never were and we never can be. We exist separate and apart from our body, but we use the body as an instrument. In speaking of the body, the Master said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The day will come when it will be necessary for us to lay down this body because we will be ready for another experience. But in laying it down, it does not mean that we will be bodiless. It merely means that through our consciousness we will have built for ourselves another body. It can be likened to the experience of those who have come to the United States from the ghettos of foreign countries. They come here, and some of them remain in ghettos, but as their consciousness grows, improves, and expands, they outgrow the ghettos in which they have lived, and eventually find themselves living in a far more wholesome environment. Their consciousness has built for them a better country to live in, a better neighborhood, and a better financial structure. And even though their relatives may still be living in a ghetto back in their homeland, the drive and the consciousness of some immigrants has built for them a more satisfactory home. It is always individual consciousness that performs the miracles of life. If we are not satisfied with our present place in life, our consciousness will build a new one for us by enriching itself with spiritual truth. As consciousness is enriched, the body improves. The physical body, the mental body, the mind, the home, and the bank account. All these expand as consciousness is imbued with spiritual truth. The ever-presence and availability of ILLUMINED consciousness, the soul, or the life of an individual never dies, nor does it lose its attained development. Therefore, Jesus the Christ who left this experience in full illumination still exists and lives. He does not live in any place. He lives in and as consciousness. And since consciousness is infinite, he lives and exists in your consciousness and in mine, and it is within our power to receive light and instruction from that consciousness which forever has been, is now, and forever can be identified as Jesus Christ. Gautama the Buddha who left this plane in full illumination still lives, still teaches, and still performs his mighty works, and this is all being done in consciousness, and that means in your consciousness and my consciousness. We are being illumined and instructed by that state of consciousness. And so we could go on and find that all those who have attained illumination and who have left this plane fully illumined are right here where we are. They are here and are facing us through our own consciousness. And if we have not yet known that all spiritual light is embodied within our consciousness, we should become aware of it now. The kingdom of God of allness is within us, and we are being instructed of God. If, at this moment, it appears to be coming through a book, that is only a temporary situation, just as when it came through Jesus Christ at the time when he was physically present on earth. Jesus left this plane, but spiritual illumination continued because it remained in individual consciousness. And as your spiritual teacher passes from this experience, spiritual illumination will continue within you. Throughout all ages, spiritual teachers, revelators, and leaders will appear in the consciousness of man to speak the language of the day. We have had need of every mental and spiritual teaching that has appeared on earth, because each one has been a stepping stone to where we are today in the infinite way, which, through the principles it has revealed, is preparing consciousness for the day when no one will have to think in terms of a carnal mind, because there will not even be the temptation of a carnal mind there. That is the state of mysticism. That is when the individual no longer has to impersonalize, because in a God-realized consciousness, there is no evil to behold. That is the mystical state, and it is from that state of consciousness that the mystics and the mystical literature have come forth into experience. In proportion as you learn to impersonalize, you are preparing yourself for that experience because you are training yourself for a state of mind in which evil has no reality, no power, no law, no person, no cause. When you have come to that place, you have that mind which was also in Christ Jesus, a mind that can look at your particular pillate and say, "Thou hast no power." That can look at the cripple and say, "What did hinder you?" That can look at the blind man and say, "Open your eyes." In that state of consciousness, there are no opposing powers. Across the desk, the spiritual life has a starting point which is common to all, reconciliation. Naturally, since I and the Father are one, I must first consciously reconcile myself to God by abiding in his spirit and his love. Practically, this means acknowledging spirit as the cause, substance, and law unto myself, and to all that is, ascribing all power unto spirit and no power to form except that that form be all that invisible spirit is. It means acknowledging omnipresence, omniscience, omnipotence as the reality of my being, of myself. Hereby am I reconciled to God, but this is not sufficient. Before I can go to the altar to pray, I must be reconciled to my fellow man, friend and foe, near and far. I and my Father are one. 6. And therefore, reconciliation with my fellow man means recognizing and acknowledging that God is the self of everyone. Now, in my conscious oneness with God, I am consciously one with my fellow man. That is not yet enough. God is likewise the substance, intelligence, and law of all the universe, of the sun, moon, stars, and planets, of the earth and all that therein is, the fish in the waters, the birds in the air, the crops beneath and above the ground, the gold and silver and gems. Verily, the earth is the Lord, and the fullness thereof. In this realization, we are fully reconciled, and now I am one with God and one with the infinite forms as which it appears. This must even include weather and climate, and the laws of nature. In this reconciliation, my conscious oneness with God constitutes my oneness with all spiritual being and idea. Please study the chapter, Conscious Oneness, in The World is New. When you read in the opening chapter of this book, the world is new to every soul when Christ has entered in. Remember that the Christ enters every soul at the moment of reconciliation to God and to every manifestation of its being. The act of reconciliation is love in action. Since the first step in reconciliation is the recognition of your Christ self, the second step must be the recognition of the Christ self of everyone. Would we now defile ourselves, knowing our true identity and the divine nature of our being? Could we possibly defile another, cheat, lie, defraud, debase anyone, anywhere, anytime? Watch the miracle of your rebirth through reconciliation. Observe how the laws of nature work with you, how even the weather and climate bless you. Observe that the animal and bird worlds become reconciled to you. This is a miracle of the infinite way of life.